In the dusty frontier town of Red Hollow, two powerful cattle ranching families, the Whitfields and the Crawfords, have been locked in a bitter feud for over a decade. What began as a dispute over water rights has escalated into violence, threats, and mistrust that divides the entire community. When young Caleb Whitfield proposes to marry Abigail Crawford, the daughter of his family's greatest enemy, both families view it as either the ultimate betrayal or the only path to peace. As Caleb and Abigail navigate their arranged marriage of convenience, they discover their union may be the key to ending generations of hatred and saving each other's lives when old enemies and new threats emerge from the unforgiving frontier. The year was 1847, and the territory of Montana stretched endlessly under a sky so vast it seemed to swallow the earth whole. In the heart of this untamed frontier lay Red Hollow, a settlement where survival hinged on the strength of your gun hand and the depth of your well. Two names commanded respect and fear in equal measure throughout the valley: Whitfield and Crawford. The Whitfield ranch sprawled across the northern hills like a kingdom carved from stone and sweat. Elias Whitfield had built his empire one head of cattle at a time, his weathered hands never hesitating to protect what was his. His son Caleb inherited not only his father's steel-gray eyes and imposing frame, but also the burden of a feud that had consumed 12 years of their lives. Across the valley, beyond the winding creek naming the town, the Crawford spread dominated the southern plains. Daniel Crawford ruled with equal parts cunning and ruthlessness, his black mustache twitching at the mention of the Whitfield name. His daughter Abigail grew up hearing whispered curses about their enemies, learning to load a rifle before she mastered reading. The feud had begun simply enough. A dispute over water rights during the drought of 1835 ignited the feud. Both families, the Whitfields and the Crawfords, claimed ownership of a crucial stretch of Red Hollow Creek cutting through their lands. Words turned to threats, threats to violence, and violence to a cycle of revenge with no end. 3 men had died, fences were cut, cattle rustled, and the Montana Territory chose sides, bracing for war. Caleb Whitfield stood on the ridge overlooking the disputed creek, his horse shifting restlessly as the morning sun cast gold and amber across the landscape. At 28, he had the lean build of a man who lived in the saddle and planned strategies by night. The wind carried sage and dust, echoing countless mornings riding these hills with his father, learning their land's boundaries and the depth of their hatred for the Crawfords. But today felt different. Today, Caleb carried a proposal to end the feud or ignite a war consuming them all. The idea struck during the long winter months, when snow trapped both families, forcing him to rethink the violence defining his adult life. His solution was radical, unprecedented, and risky, but the only path to peace. He would marry Abigail Crawford. The plan's simplicity was bold. A union would render further violence impractical, their children inheriting lands from both sides to forge cooperation over conflict. The thought tightened his stomach with anxiety, but Caleb had seen enough blood over muddy water to know change was urgent. Abigail Crawford was no longer the pigtailed girl from town glimpses. At 23, she'd grown into a woman known for intelligence and independence across Montana. Some claimed she outshot most men. Others said she negotiated cattle prices that would stun a banker. Caleb Whitfield had never spoken more than a handful of words to her, but he'd watched Abigail Crawford from a distance, noting her proud carriage and fierce family loyalty as he guided his horse down the slope toward the Crawford property. Caleb touched the letter in his vest pocket. He'd written and rewritten it a dozen times, each version balancing respect and determination. The words felt inadequate for his proposal, but they'd have to do. The Crawford ranch house stood like a fortress in the valley below, its whitewashed walls and green shutters stark against the wild Montana landscape. Smoke rose from the chimney, and Caleb saw figures moving in the yard, ranch hands busy with morning tasks, oblivious that their visitor might hold the key to ending years of bloodshed. Caleb's horse hooves echoed on the hard-packed earth as he neared the Crawford ranch. 2 cowboys lounged by the corral, hands instinctively brushing their gun belts upon recognizing a Whitfield rider. Word spread fast, and by the time Caleb reached the hitching post, Daniel Crawford emerged, his weathered face set in granite lines of suspicion and barely contained rage. "You've got some nerve riding onto my property, Whitfield," Daniel growled, his hand resting on the ivory handle of his Colt revolver. His gray hair caught the morning light, and his dark eyes burned with 12 years of conflict. "State your business, or get off my land before I decide you're trespassing with ill intent." Caleb dismounted slowly, hands visible and away from his weapons. He'd expected this, but facing the legendary Daniel Crawford sent a chill of nervous energy through him. The older man stood coiled, ready to strike at the slightest provocation. "I come in peace, Mr. Crawford," Caleb said, voice steady despite the tension crackling around them. "I have a proposition that could benefit both our families. I ask only for a few minutes to explain." Daniel barked a harsh, humorless laugh. "A proposition from a Whitfield? The only thing your family's given mine is grief and gunpowder. You've got 30 seconds to speak your piece before I run you off." Before Caleb could respond, the front door opened, and Abigail Crawford stepped onto the porch. She moved with confident grace, commanding attention. Her dark auburn hair was pulled into a practical bun, its natural wave peeking through. Her green dress was simple yet fitted, practical for ranch life but flattering, marking her as a lady. Her eyes, intelligent, alert, locked on Caleb with undisguised curiosity. "Should hear what Mr. Whitfield has to say. It's not every day one of them rides onto our property alone and unarmed." Daniel shot his daughter a warning look, but Abigail stepped down from the porch with deliberate determination. Caleb found himself studying her face, noting the high cheekbones reflecting strong character, and the slight upturn of her chin suggesting she wasn't easily intimidated. This was no sheltered ranch princess. This was a woman forged by the same harsh Montana frontier that shaped them all. "Miss Crawford," Caleb said, removing his hat in a gesture of respect. "I'm honored to finally make your proper acquaintance." Abigail's eyebrows rose slightly at his formal politeness, but she inclined her head gracefully. "Mr. Whitfield, your reputation precedes you, though I'm curious what brings you here today." Caleb took a deep breath and withdrew the letter from his vest pocket. The paper felt weightless, yet it held explosive potential to reshape the valley. "What I propose is unconventional, but I believe it's our best hope to end the conflict between our families." "Spit it out, boy," Daniel snapped, his patience thinning. Ranch hands gathered at a respectful distance, hands near their weapons, eyes fixed on the unprecedented scene. "I propose a marriage," Caleb said, his words dropping into the sudden silence like stones into still water. "A union between Miss Abigail and myself, binding our families and ending this feud once and for all." The silence was so complete Caleb heard the wind whistling through nearby cottonwoods and the distant lowing of cattle. Abigail's face stilled, her green eyes widening slightly as she processed his words. Daniel's complexion turned an alarming red, his hand tightening on his gun grip. "You arrogant son of a," he began, but Abigail raised her hand, halting her father mid-curse. "Wait," she said, her voice thoughtful rather than outraged. "Let him explain his reasoning." Caleb felt a surge of gratitude for Abigail's willingness to listen, steeling himself for the most critical conversation of his life. The weight of every eye in the ranch yard pressed on him, her support buying precious moments, though Daniel's patience hung by a thread. His face now purple, the hands shifting nervously, poised between negotiation and gunfight. "The way I see it," Caleb began, voice steady across the tense silence, "this feud has cost both our families more than we can afford. Good men have died, cattle lost, and our children will inherit nothing but hatred if we don't break this cycle." Thomas snorted derisively. "Pretty words from the son of the man who shot my brother-in-law. And your men killed my cousin last spring," Caleb replied evenly, refusing to spiral into another round of accusations. "That's exactly my point. We can keep trading blood until no one's left to carry either name, or we can find a better way." Abigail stepped closer, her green eyes studying Caleb with an intensity that pierced his soul. "And you believe marriage is that better way?" "I do," Caleb said, meeting her gaze firmly. "A union would make us allies, not enemies. Our children would inherit land from both sides of the creek, rendering future conflict pointless and impossible. We'd share water rights, not fight over them. Assuming either of us survives long enough to have children," Abigail said dryly. "Some might see this marriage as the ultimate betrayal." Caleb nodded grimly. "I won't lie, Miss Crawford. There are risks. My father doesn't know I'm here and won't be pleased. But after months of thought, I see no other solution without more graves." Daniel Harmon paced during this exchange, his boots carving a path in the dust as emotions warred across his weathered face. He whirled to face Caleb, eyes blazing. "You think you can ride onto my property and ask for my daughter's hand like we're civilized neighbors at tea?" he roared. "Your family's tried to destroy mine for 12 years. Now you want the ultimate prize?" "Father," Abigail cut in sharply, her voice slicing through his rage. "I'm not a prize to be claimed. If this marriage is discussed, it's a practical arrangement between equals, not a conquest." Her steel surprised Caleb, though it fit a woman thriving in this harsh land. Abigail Crawford was no delicate flower. "You're seriously considering this madness?" Daniel whispered dangerously. Abigail paused, her eyes shifting between her father and Caleb, weighing a decision to reshape their lives. "I'm considering Mr. Whitfield might be right about one thing. This feud is destroying us. How many more men must die over a muddy creek? How many cattle rustled? How many years with guns under our pillows?" She turned to Caleb, expression unreadable. "But marriage isn't a business deal, Mr. Whitfield, no matter how practical. If you're serious, understand you're asking to bind my life to yours." Caleb's throat tightened at her truth. His planning focused on politics and practicality, overlooking the personal reality of sharing a home, bed, and future with a stranger. "I understand," he said quietly. "I'm not offering a love match, but respect, protection, and a chance to build better than our fathers left us." Abigail studied him, the silence stretching like a taut wire, heavy with a decision to ripple through generations. Abigail's green eyes never left Caleb's face as she weighed his words, and he admired the quiet strength radiating from her, even amid uncertainty. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and spoke. "I'll need time to consider your proposal, Mr. Whitfield. This isn't a decision to be rushed, no matter how practical your reasoning." Daniel Crawford exploded. "Consider it? Abigail, have you lost your mind? This is Elias Whitfield's son standing in our yard, asking to marry into the family he's tried to destroy. And maybe that's why we should listen." Abigail shot back, her voice rising to match his intensity. "Maybe it takes someone from their family to see a way out of this madness." Caleb watched the argument unfold, noting the passion driving both. Abigail's intelligence shone in every word, matched by her fierce loyalty. Proof she wouldn't be swayed by flattery or romance. Her decision would hinge on logic and practicality. "Miss Crawford," Caleb interrupted, breaking the heated exchange. "I respect your need for time, but I must warn you, my presence here won't stay secret long. My father will learn of this, as yours already has. If we move forward, it must be quick." Abigail nodded thoughtfully. "How quick? Days, not weeks?" Caleb replied honestly. "Once word spreads, both families will take sides. The longer we wait, the more entrenched the opposition becomes." Daniel ran his hands through his graying hair, his face a map of frustration and conflict. "This is insane. Even if Abigail agreed, how do you handle the wedding? Half the territory would see it as betrayal, the other half a trap." Caleb had anticipated this. "We'd need neutral ground. Reverend Thompson in town has pushed for peace between us for years. He'd perform the ceremony, and the church would offer sanctuary from immediate reactions." "Immediate reactions," Daniel repeated bitterly. "You mean gunfights and bloodshed?" "I mean giving both families time to see the union's wisdom once it's done," Caleb corrected. "People accept a fait accompli more easily than a proposal." Abigail listened with growing thoughtfulness, her eyes shifting between the men as she processed the challenges. When she spoke again, her decisive tone silenced them. "There's something you need to understand, Mr. Whitfield. If I agree, which I'm not saying I will, it won't be as a passive pawn in your peace plan. I have conditions. First, this ranch stays in my family's name. I won't let my father lose his life's work for your convenience. Second, any children will know both family histories, good and bad. Third, if this marriage works, it's a genuine partnership, not some outdated notion of wifely submission." Her steel left no room for negotiation, and Caleb nodded, grappling with the implications. Abigail Crawford was no woman to be dominated. And perhaps that was exactly what this situation required. "Agreed," Caleb said simply. Daniel stared at his daughter, as if seeing her anew. "Abigail, you can't be serious about this." "I'm serious about ending this feud before it destroys what's left of both our families," she replied firmly. "Mr. Whitfield is right. We're losing blood and money while our neighbors thrive in peace. Something must change." She turned to Caleb, her expression resolute. "I'll give you my answer tomorrow at sunset. Meet me at the old oak by the creek, the boundary between our properties. If I accept, we'll need to move quickly." Caleb's heart hammered as he realized Abigail Crawford was genuinely considering his proposal. "And if you decide against it," her smile was grim but kind, "then you'd better have another plan, because I doubt we'll get a second chance." Caleb spent a restless night staring at his bedroom ceiling, shadows dancing across rough-hewn beams as moonlight filtered through. Every creak of the old ranch house amplified in the darkness, jarring him awake. By morning, he felt aged a decade. The day dragged with agonizing slowness, checking horses, reviewing accounts with foremen, inspecting fences, his mind fixed on Sunset and Abigail's answer. His father, Elias, noticed his distraction at breakfast, chalking it up to ranch stresses. Caleb said nothing, delaying the truth of his Harmon visit until her decision. As the sun dipped toward the western hills, he saddled his best horse and rode to the creek dividing their lands for over a decade. The old oak stood firm, its massive trunk straddling the boundary. Caleb had played there as a child, before the feud barred such innocence. Abigail was already there, her horse grazing peacefully by the water. She had changed from her practical ranch dress into a deep blue riding habit that complemented her auburn hair and brightened her green eyes. Caleb dismounted and approached slowly, searching her expression for a hint of her decision. "Mr. Whitfield," she said formally, inclining her head in greeting. "You're punctual, Miss Crawford," he replied, removing his hat. "I've been watching the clock all day." Abigail smiled slightly, easing some of the tension in his chest. She gestured to a fallen log, smoothed by years of weather, and they sat facing each other across the chasm between their families. "I've spent considerable time thinking about your proposal," Abigail began, voice steady and measured. "I've weighed the risks against the benefits, considered the practical implications, and consulted my conscience for the greatest good." Caleb held his breath, awaiting the verdict shaping his future. "I've decided to accept," she said simply. The words struck Caleb like a blow, leaving him momentarily speechless. He'd hoped, planned, dreamed of this, yet it felt surreal. "You're certain?" he asked. Abigail nodded firmly. "I am, but I want clarity. I'm not accepting because I've fallen in love with you, Mr. Whitfield. I believe this marriage offers our best chance to build something better than our inheritance." "I understand," Caleb said, genuinely respecting her honesty. "I hope time might bring genuine affection alongside our partnership." "That would be my hope too," she agreed. "Now we must move quickly. I've spoken with my father. He's not pleased but won't oppose publicly, seeing the necessity." Relief washed over Caleb. Daniel's reluctant cooperation eased logistics. "What about the ceremony?" "I spoke with Reverend Thompson this afternoon," Abigail said, pulling a small paper from her reticule. "He'll perform it tomorrow evening, if both families agree to a temporary truce. I've arranged the town marshal to witness and prevent violence, and sent word to our family's trusted allies for support." Caleb was impressed and slightly daunted by her efficiency. Less than 24 hours, and she'd decided and planned comprehensively. "And perhaps that's exactly what this situation required," Abigail said, her expression growing serious. "Once we speak our vows, there's no turning back. Whatever challenges we face, and there will be many, we'll face them together. Are you prepared for that commitment?" Caleb met her gaze, recognizing the strength and intelligence that could make her his greatest ally or fiercest opponent. "I am," he said, meaning it fully. The next evening arrived with unseasonable storm clouds gathering, mirroring the tension over the small church in Red Hollow. Caleb stood at the altar in his best suit, watching both families file into the wooden pews with the weariness of soldiers in enemy territory. The divide was stark, Whitfields on the left, Crawfords on the right, a conspicuous gap down the center aisle reflecting 12 years of bloodshed and mistrust. Reverend Thompson stood beside Caleb, his weathered hands gripping his prayer book nervously. Marshal Evans positioned himself near the back, hand resting casually on his gun belt, a gesture meant to seem relaxed but fooling no one. When Abigail appeared in the doorway, Caleb's breath caught. She wore her mother's wedding dress, altered for her frame, and carried a simple bouquet of wildflowers she'd picked that morning. No music, no procession, just Abigail walking steadily down the aisle with her father. Daniel's face masked conflicted emotions as he placed her hand in Caleb's. "Take care of her," he whispered, voice thick. "She's worth more than this damned feud." The ceremony was brief and practical, lacking the flowery language of romance-driven weddings. Their kiss, pronouncing them husband and wife, was gentle and respectful, a promise of partnership. The reception in the church's social hall briefly felt like a normal celebration, the martial and neutral ground fostering a temporary peace. Abigail moved gracefully between groups, her diplomatic skills bridging relatives from both sides. As tensions eased, Caleb dared to hope this unusual start might lead to peace, until his cousin Levi burst through the doors, face flushed with anger and whiskey. "This is an abomination," Levi shouted, slicing through the conversation. "Caleb, you've betrayed everything our family stands for." Several Crawford men rose, hands near weapons, and the fragile peace began to crumble. Levi, emboldened, drew his gun, aiming at Caleb's chest. This ends now. No Whitfield makes peace with Crawford's scum while I'm alive. Time slowed as Caleb stared down the barrel, realizing his planning overlooked betrayal within. He saw Levi's finger tighten, death imminent on his wedding night. The gunshot rang deafeningly in the confined hall, but instead of pain, Abigail's body slammed into him, knocking him aside as Levi's bullet whizzed past. Her derringer, hidden in her dress, smoked in her steady hand as Levi collapsed, crying out, clutching his wounded shoulder. The next person who draws a weapon in this church won't be so fortunate, Abigail said calmly, her voice projecting absolute authority amid the chaos. This marriage offers hope for all our families. Opposing it is opposing peace itself. Marshal Evans moved swiftly to disarm and arrest Levi, while members of both families stared in stunned silence at the bride who had saved her new husband's life. The message was clear. Abigail Whitfield was not to be underestimated, and she'd defend her new family with the same fierce loyalty she'd shown her birth family. In the weeks that followed, tales of her quick thinking and deadly accuracy spread across Montana, becoming legend. More crucially, her actions convinced even the most stubborn kin that the marriage was genuine, and the new alliance would be guarded by force if needed. 5 years later, as Caleb watched Abigail teach their twin sons to ride in the pasture now bearing both family names, he reflected on the wisdom of her carrying that derringer. She'd saved his life that night and secured the future they built together, day by day. The end. If you enjoyed this story, please comment where you are watching from, and make sure to leave a like and subscribe for more such stories.